Ya, ahora sí me escucho yo. Ya está grabando. Si quieren hacer alguna prueba o algo.
Ya,
¿Ya? ¿Ya está
ya.
grabando? Sí, hace rato está grabando.
Ok. Sí. Ok. Empiezo.
¿Verdad? Uno, dos, tres. When we usually think about bilingualism, of course, English, but we also think about levels like A1, B1, B2, C1, or about speaking perfectly without mistakes. At least that is how I understand it before exploring more. For me, my opinion, being bilingual means speak two languages with good grammar and good pronunciation. But I realized that bilingualism is much more complex than that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, actually it is because I felt something similar. I used to see bilingualism as reaching equal competence in both languages, like being balanced. But after reading Baker, I realized that that concept is actually a lie. I understood that balanced bilingualism is more an ideal than a reality. And our abilities change depending on the context, the domain, the situation. So bilingualism is actually dynamic and not something that we should consider like symmetrical.
Mhm.
Exactly. And something that really changed like my perspective was like understanding the languages, of course, and it's hard to say, but are not socially equal, and bilingualism is shaped by power. What else? Prestige and social context. So it's not just communication, because we can say, like, for example, some languages give you access to opportunities like French, Chinese, English, but others don't. And the perfect example is here in Colombia, for example, indigenous languages.
That's connected directly with the Mejia's idea of bilingualism because it explains that some forms of bilingualism, especially in prestigious international languages, like you mentioned, Mitchell, are highly valued because, of course, they provide access to mobility, education, and economic opportunities. So, yeah, bilingualism becomes linked to social prestige and linguistic capital.
Yeah, and that is where we start seeing the connection with access and privilege because not everyone has the same opportunities to develop the kind of bilingualism.
Yeah, that's correct. I mean, I do totally agree. Because when I reflected on my own experience, I actually realized that my bilingual development aligns a lot with what this author, Mejia, calls elite bilingualism. I was exposed to English from an early age. My father's educational background and international professional mobility gave me access to English in a very natural way, let's say. I attended private institutes and I reached a V1 level at the age of 12, I think I was. Yeah. At that time, I didn't see it as a privilege, but like as an academic obligation, and that's it. But now I understand that many people in Colombia do not have that type of access.
And in my case, something similar happened, Sophie. I studied in private schools, went to language academies, I traveled abroad. So I can say that my bilingualism developed more from choice than necessity. Like it's like the same,
Mm-hmm.
like connected with Becker's idea of the elective bilingualism. And something that I evidence is that English has facilitated my whole life. I was able to travel alone, work abroad, use the English for my businesses. So when I see this, I realize that English functions, what I can say, like economic and for social power.
Yeah.
Yeah, I also feel very lucky. My mom always being I believe that learning English opened doors, especially in Spanish. She was able to pursue her master's degree thanks to English, and also I have learned a lot with books. We have English book at home, later I live abroad because of my parents' work, so my exposure was not accidental. It was like part of a purpose. And that's how pluralism becomes value when it gives access to capital.
For me, it was different. I didn't attend private academics or bilingual school. You guys, I learned English at the university classes independently, and of course, with my best friend, Duolingo. But it
Mhm.
was difficult. I remember feeling frustrated because I didn't have the same opportunities, foundations as others. But later, when I got my first job at Teleperformance, I understood that the economic value of the English. Before that, my salary was higher than the minimum wage, and that positioned me differently socially. That is when I realized how language can function as a tool of social mobility. Mobility.
Espérense, pueden, o sea, yo sé que Michelle puede editar esto y vaina.
Mm.
Andrés, ¿puedes volver a repetir este párrafo? Es que
Mobility.
dijiste before my salary was higher y eso ya, pues,
Sí,
ya en
eso mismo
nivel
dije.
no tiene sentido
No makes sense.
porque, ajá, no es algo que
Ah,
se
sí, sí,
pueda
sí. Ahí
corregir.
la cagué.
O sea, mira,
Verga.
for
Ok.
me it was, I mean, y
Sí.
hazlo ya no con esa voz. O sea, for me it was different. I didn't attend private academies or bilingual schools. I actually learned English at university and independently. It was difficult. I
What is
remember
going
feeling
on?
frustrated. Refleja esa frustración. I remember feeling frustrated because I didn't have the same foundations. ¿Cómo es? Foundations.
Foundations, and
Foundations
others, as
as
others.
others. But later, when I got a job at a call center at 20 years old, at the age of 20, como lo quieras decir,
Okay.
I understood the economic value of English. Why? Because my salary then was higher than the minimum wage, and that positioned me differently. Es que esto está difícil para que lo pronuncie. That positioned me
But
differently
Different
socially
socially.
differentially,
in
oh,
Differently, yeah.
society, in society.
society.
Yeah.
Position me differently in society. That
Well,
is when I
that
realized
and
how
that
language can
positioned me
function
and that positioned
as
me
a tool of
differently in
social mobility.
society. That's when I realized how language can function as a tool of social mobility. Mobility.
Mobility.
Mobility. Tal cual.
Oh,
Bueno, entonces esa parte la cortas, Mitch, qué pena, pero es que ya esa parte pues no había forma
Sí,
sí.
de
tranqui.
editarla porque ya no tenía sentido.
Desde- Bueno, uno, dos, tres. For me, it was different. Because I didn't attend a private academics or bilingual schools. As you guys, I learned English at the university classes and independently. It was difficult. Because I remember feeling very frustrated, and because I didn't have the same foundation as others. But later, when I got my first job in a call center, I understood the economic value of English. My salary was higher than the minimum wage, that positioned me differently in the society. That is when I realized how language can function as a tool of mobile and social mobility.
A ver, sonó demasiado
Otra vez, sí,
leído.
otra vez. Muy leído otra vez, pero entonces voy a hablar con la otra voz más sencillo y tranquilo. A ver,
Sí,
uno,
o sea,
dos,
como lo
tres.
hiciste al inicio.
Sí, okay. And for me, it was different. I didn't attend a private or bilingual school. I learned English at the university classes and independently. It was difficult. I remember feeling frustrated because I didn't have like the same foundation as others. But later, when I got my first job at a call center, I understood the economic value of English. Yeah, and also my salary was higher than the minimum wage, and that positioned me different in the society. And that is when I realized how language can function as a tool of social mobility.
Estás leyendo. Y dijiste private,
Let's
private, private
private,
account.
private.
La última,
Finish.
la última, sí,
No,
la última.
ya, okay.
Y Andrés, o sea, es el último párrafito grande que tienes. Ya el resto ya lo puedes manejar súper fluido porque ya es poquito.
Ni siquiera estoy viendo el
Entonces,
computador, estoy viendo al techo. Ok.
for me, it was different. I mean, I didn't attend private academies for bilingual schools. I learned English at university and independently. It was difficult. I remember feeling frustrated because I didn't have the same foundations as others. Así, o sea, métele, métele, pero no le metas tanto como si estuvieras leyendo.
Bueno, bueno. Sí, uno, dos, tres. And for me, it was different. And I didn't have like, for me, it was different. I didn't attend like private academics or bilingual schools. I learned English at the university classes independently. It was difficult. I remember feel frustrated because I didn't have the same foundation as others. But later, when I got my first job at a call center, I understood that the economic value of the English. My salary was higher than the minimum wage, and that positioned me differently in the society.
And that experience that you said, Andres, also
Mhm.
shows something important, and is that bilingualism is not, what can I say the word, like neutral, because it can be additive for some people, like for example in our cases where English added opportunities, but for example others that have, for example, minority language speakers, bilingualism can be subtractive if their first language of course is marginalized.
Yeah, and I think that in Colombia, for example, indigenous languages are often seen as useless, but it's just because of economic terms, because in cultural terms they are so valuable.
Mhm.
And the government prioritizes like English, of course, following the European standards like the CFR, but it doesn't invest equally in preserving local languages. And it's unfair because it creates a hierarchy of languages, as Garcia explains in the readings.
Yeah, yeah, I do
Mm.
totally agree. Now that we're actually speaking about the Common European Framework of Reference, that's another point that we need to question. Because this thing it was actually created by the Council of Europe and classifies proficiency into levels like we all know A1, B2 or C1, and it gives a structure and international recognition, but it also reduces bilingualism to measurable skills and just that, like reading, writing, listening, and speaking. And in our cases, I do remember in the classes the teacher mentioning that without a certification, at least of a C1 level, you're anyone in the field. You're nothing in the job market. So, yeah, that's something that I think we need to question a little bit.
Part of yeah, it assumes that bilingualism can be standardized and quantified, but it doesn't fully capture the social, cultural, and emotional dimension of using multiple languages.
And something that I've been thinking about, you said, is that bilingualism doesn't look like what exams expect. Because in, for example, in real life, we mix, adapt, switch between languages depending of the context, like
Mm.
who we are talking to or where we are. So it's not like the readings say, it's not to separate things in our heads. It's much more flexible and dynamic. But for example, the standardized frameworks, like the Common European Framework of Reference, like guess that don't really capture that complexity because they just measure the isolated skills.
Yeah, also when Colombia adopts the European frameworks like the CFR, as the standard, it reinforces the idea that European models define what good English is. And of course, that is not, it is not good, and it's unfair because it connects bilingualism with a specific ideology or prestige. I understand that it can be measurable, but it cannot be standardized as an stereotype.
Mm-hmm. Just standardized like this, like prestige, and that's it. Yeah, that's difficult. So the question becomes like, are we actually measuring like the language competence, or are we just measuring access to quality education and privilege, because that was actually our case. Just education
Yes,
and
of but I
privilege.
just want to add, I just want to add like how it can education systems promote equity instead of reproducing that elite bilingualism.
I think answering your question for me, I think this class helped me to see that bilingualism is not just about speaking two languages. It is about power, access, and of course, social positioning.
Yeah, and it's about actually also recognizing that our own bilingual trajectories were shaped by mobility, socioeconomic status, and academic backgrounds.
And also understanding that even when access was limited, like in my case, bilingualism still changed my opportunities, but was harder.
Mhm.
And now I understand bilingualism not only is tool of communication, but it's something that we can say that is like deeply connected to those inequalities, the linguistic hierarchies, and I guess most important, the global structures.
Mhm.
To close, I want to say a phrase that for me, bilingualism is not just a skill.
I think it is a social phenomenon actually connected to globalization in this case.
Mm, yeah,
Yeah, I guess that of course thinking on that is going to help us to be like more responsible on like what bilingualism is.
yeah, and it reflects privilege and power.
Yep, that's it.